Sir, I'll have to ask you to move down to economy. No one moved, but dozens of eyes turned toward the man standing calmly in the aisle. Adrian Wells, 41, CEO of Wells Cyber Defense, needed no introduction to anyone who knew the tech world. But here, on this commercial flight, all they saw was a black man in a sharp navy suit holding a ticket for seat 1A. Adrian did not react. He simply blinked slowly, as though he had seen this too many times before. In front of him stood Lena Hart, 36, the lead flight attendant, her eyes icy, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Behind them, passengers whispered. Some craned their necks, others raised their phones. In seat 2A, a teenage girl named Zoe Park whispered, "Oh my God, live stream this right now." The red live icon flashed across her screen. Adrian had boarded with a quiet confidence, the kind that had carried him through years of running a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity empire. His polished Italian leather shoes made no sharp clicks. They whispered with each step, as if he were not entering a first-class cabin, but walking into an arena. In his hand, he held the printed ticket. Seat 1A, First Class, Sky Continental Airlines. Lena never looked at the ticket. Her gaze clung to his face, his skin, and the calm she deemed out of place. "I'm sorry, this seat is for first-class passengers," Lena repeated, louder now, enough for the whole cabin to hear. A ripple of whispers spread like waves across still water. The man in 1C, Douglas Maran, late 30s, tie loosened, Bluetooth in his ear, muttered just loud enough for nearby Rose to hear. "Finally, someone doing their job. People like this always think they can sneak in with points or something." Adrian heard. He heard everything, but not a muscle on his face moved. Zoe tilted her phone, her live stream audience exploding. 240, 3 viewers, 917 comments. The screen filled with messages. "WTF, he already showed his ticket. This is straight, up profiling. I can't take this. I'm sick watching this." Zoe's heart pounded. She knew she was capturing something far bigger than her usual videos. Adrian kept a thin smile, his voice low, courteous, but firm. "I believe there's a mistake. This is my ticket." He presented it again. The scanner blinked green. The word "valid" appeared. The name matched. The barcode was correct. Yet Lena still tilted the ticket under the light, as if hoping to find evidence of forgery. "Are you certain this is really your ticket? Did you use reward points to upgrade?" "Sometimes the system glitches," she said, her cold smile never reaching her eyes. Adrian replied, his voice carrying just enough to be heard a few rows back. "I paid in full on the company account. Round trip, not an upgrade." His tone cut sharp, making a few passengers sit straighter. It was the same voice that had once made Fortune 500 CFOs fall silent. But Lena still blocked his path. "I think you should wait in the service area until we verify with the boarding gate." Adrian did not move. "I think I'll sit in my seat." Tension spread like static. Someone coughed. A child cried in economy. Douglas in 1C leaned toward his neighbor, saying loudly, "Here we go again. They always think they're special." Small chuckles escaped. Adrian heard them. He had heard them 1,000 times before, the sweet, poisonous echo of prejudice disguised as sparks. Lena pressed her lips tight. "I'll call the supervisor." She turned sharply, her heels striking the carpet like a drum beat of warning. Adrian placed his laptop case on seat 1A. He did not sit, not yet. Experience had taught him. Standing made his presence undeniable. And right now, he needed to be undeniable. In the row behind, Eleanor Price, her silver hair in a low bun, a lavender coat pinned with a floral brooch, tilted her head as she studied him. Her eyes were not judging. They were searching, as if piecing together a memory of where she had seen this man before. Zoe leaned close to her phone, whispering to her live stream. Over 1,000 viewers now. This is insane. He's shown the ticket 3 times. This is profiling. I'm shaking. Comments poured in. Don't stop streaming. This is evidence. Does anyone know his name? I want to cry. Is this America in 2025? Lena returned, this time with Miles Turner, the 44-year-old purser, tall, thin, dressed in a grey vest. This man is attempting to sit in seat 1A, Lena said, forcing a strained smile. Miles glanced at the ticket. The scanner turned green again. But when he looked up, his eyes carried caution. We just want a smooth process. Could you please wait a moment while we confirm? Adrian repeated, his tone even, sharp steel wrapped in velvet. I have shown my ticket 3 times. You still question its validity. For what reason? Because of my skin, my suit, or something else? Miles flinched slightly. The air froze. In that instant, Eleanor whispered so softly that only Zoe and her live stream caught it. I know who he is. Keep recording. Things are about to get interesting. Adrian stood tall, his back straight, his gaze calm. A man not pleading, not begging, simply waiting for the cabin, and the world watching through 1,000 screens to realize they had just sparked a storm without knowing who their opponent truly was. The scanner had flashed green 3 times. Ticket valid. Name matched. Correct seat. Yet Lena Hart's eyes stayed locked on Adrian Wells's face like a steel clasp that refused to release. Every reason was wrapped in the word procedure. But beneath it all, what was driving her was not regulation. It was bias. Douglas Mara, in seat 1C, glanced up from his tablet, muttering just loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Good thing someone's checking. People like that always think they can sneak into first class with reward tricks. The contempt in his voice cut through the air like a dull knife, shallow yet painful. Adrian heard every word. He had heard words like these thousands of times in his life. They no longer had the power to enrage him, but they were enough to remind him that silence did not always mean safety. In seat 2A, Zoe Park whispered to her live stream, Over 2,400 people are watching. He's so calm, like he's been through this before. Comments poured in. Stop. He clearly has a ticket. This is open racism. Does anyone know who he is? He looks powerful. Zoe gripped her phone tighter. Her hands trembled, but her eyes burned with light. This wasn't just another viral clip. She felt something bigger taking shape. Miles Turner, the purser, squinted at the ticket once more, then gave a slight nod to Lena. But he didn't hand it back to Adrian right away. His voice was low, yet heavy enough to compress the cabin air. We've had issues with unauthorized upgrades lately. Some people hacking the system. You understand our concern, don't you? Adrian tilted his head, his thin smile sharp as a surgeon's blade. I understand concern, but I also understand the concept of implicit bias. You've checked this ticket 3 times. Is that still not enough? Or is what you are trying to confirm not on the paper but on my face? Miles stepped back involuntarily. The words dropped like lead, filling the first-class cabin that had gone quiet as a chapel. Suddenly, Eleanor Price, 70-8, wrapped in a lavender coat with a silver floral brooch, spoke. Her voice was not loud, but steady enough to demand attention. I have flown with this airline for many years. I know what a platinum ticket looks like, and I can confirm he is in the right seat. The cabin jolted. Some eyes shifted from suspicion to unease, but Lena clenched her jaw, her smile fixed as she said softly, "Thank you, ma'am, but we'll handle this." Zoe aimed her phone toward Eleanor, whispering, "Oh my God, another 1,000 viewers in just 1 minute. People are calling this profiling live." The air grew heavy like lead. Adrian still had not sat down. He knew this was not about a seat. This was a performance of false authority, and he had no intention of backing down. In his mind, an old memory surged. The day he stood at the gates of a Georgia country club, his father dressed impeccably in a linen suit, only to be denied entry even after paying membership fees. The guard had said, "Not on the list, not a fit." That was the day Adrian understood that sometimes his very presence was resistance enough. And today, in seat 1A, history was repeating itself. Lena leaned toward Miles, whispering just loud enough for Adrian to hear. "Call a supervisor. Don't let him sit." Adrian drew a deep breath. No anger, no resentment, just a silent readiness for the storm to come. He looked straight at Zoe, who was still live streaming. Meeting her eyes, he gave a small nod, a subtle gesture, but full of meaning. Keep recording. Let them see. In that moment, every sound in the cabin, the clink of glassware, the rustle of newspapers, the distant cry of a child, seemed swallowed whole. Only 3 figures remained in sharp focus at the center. Adrian holding the valid ticket, Lena with her strained smile, and Miles with his wary eyes. And in the corner, Eleanor Price watched quietly, her face carrying the certainty of someone who already knew how this would end. Douglas Marin leaned back and muttered again, louder this time, "We're wasting time over someone who doesn't know his place." The words fell like a spark into a barrel of gunpowder. Some nodded, others dropped their gaze, too afraid to speak. Adrian turned, his eyes sweeping over Douglas. No anger, no smirk, just the gaze of a man who had stood on summits higher than any boardroom Douglas could ever dream of. 4 minutes had passed since Adrian entered the cabin. The flight was scheduled to depart in 15. Yet in that moment, the first-class section had become a stage. A stage where a man underestimated for his appearance was about to shatter the entire script imposed on him. Adrian slipped the ticket back into his inner pocket. He no longer needed proof. The ticket was only paper. Real power lived in him. And as Lena turned on her heel to summon another supervisor, Adrian allowed himself the faintest smile. They had no idea who they were about to face. First class was silent. Lena Hart had just disappeared behind the curtain, leaving a heavy void, as if the air itself had solidified. Adrian Wells remained standing in the aisle, tall, his navy suit crisp, his eyes cold and deep as an abyss. He did not need to shout. He knew this moment required silence, the kind of silence that would make every action that followed echo tenfold. Zoe Park panned her camera, whispering into her live stream, 5,000 people are watching now. My God, he hasn't raised his voice once. How is he so calm? Behind him, Douglas Marin snorted, trying to sound superior. Don't worry. Once security comes, he'll be tossed out. Rules are rules. But Eleanor Price, 78 years old, silver hair, a purple flower brooch pinned to her chest, only smiled faintly, as though she was the only one in the cabin who knew the real storm had only just begun. Minutes later, Lena returned. At her side was Miles Turner, the tall, thin purser in a grey vest. His face projected professionalism, but his eyes betrayed suspicion. Sir, Miles said quietly, for the flight to depart on time, we ask that you please wait in the galley until boarding control can reconfirm. Adrian did not move. His voice rolled out evenly, slow and sharp as ice. 3 scans, 3 times valid. Still not enough? Or is what you are checking not on the ticket, but on me? Miles froze. Silence stretched. Every passenger held their breath. Zoe leaned her phone closer. Comments flooded in. He just called them out on camera. Legend. Does anyone know who he is? Adrian drew a deep breath. He knew the time had come. Slowly, he set his laptop case on the tray table of seat 1A. His hand clicked the metal lock, the sound like a gun chambering a round. No one dared exhale. He pulled out a thin laptop, cold and sharp as a blade. The keyboard glowed blue as it powered on. Adrian's fingers skimmed the trackpad, the screen flaring to life. At first glance, it looked like meaningless code to most, but to the observant, it was the internal reservation infrastructure of Sky Continental Airlines. Zoe whispered, her voice trembling. Wait, this isn't something passengers ever see. Guys, he's accessing the airline's system. Miles frowned and stepped closer. What is that? Adrian did not look up. He kept typing. The screen filled with columns of data. Booking traffic, gate sync logs, security clearance, back-end timestamps. He tilted the laptop just enough for the glow to reflect into Miles's eyes. At the top left of the screen, the words appeared clearly. Wells Cyber Defense. Sky Continental Priority, Access Node. Miles's face drained of color. Lena stepped closer too, eyes widening, breath quickening. I didn't think, she stammered, her voice faltering for the first time. Zoe gasped into her live stream. Do you see those words? Wells, Cyber Defense. He's Adrian Wells. He's the one who built the entire cybersecurity infrastructure for the airlines. The chat exploded. What? The CEO is right there. Unbelievable. They just disrespected the man who runs their system. Craziest plot twist ever. Eleanor Price tilted her head, her eyes gleaming. She finally remembered. She had seen him once at a congressional hearing on airline cybersecurity. That day, Adrian Wells had said something she never forgot. Power does not lie in what you own, but in what you can shut down with a single click. Now he sat before her, and she knew that click could shake the skies. Miles tried to steady himself, his voice dropping. "Mr. Wells, I had no idea." Adrian snapped the laptop shut with a sharp crack. His face showed no joy, no anger, only cold disappointment. "You've asked enough, but the problem was never the ticket, it was prejudice." Douglas Mara in 1C, who had been pretending to ignore everything, turned, his voice breaking. "Wait, who is he? Is he really a CEO?" No one answered, but in the cabin, one by one, people understood. The game had changed. The man they had doubted was not just a passenger. He was someone who could bring the entire airline to a halt with a single signal. Adrian leaned back into seat 1A. He set the laptop on the tray, opened it again. His fingers moved swiftly, typing a short command. On the screen, a new window popped up with the words, "Protocol Sigma, armed, awaiting confirmation." He did not press enter. Not yet. But he left the screen angled so everyone could see. The message was clear. "Do not push me. I can stop this entire system with one touch." Zoe covered her mouth, tears brimming. "Guys, we're witnessing history. He could shut down an entire airline. And it all started because they didn't believe he belonged in 1A. The cabin was engulfed in silence. The silence of fear, of realization, and of a reveal that had just redefined the entire game. The whispers had not yet faded when the hiss of the jet bridge door echoed. Two figures in blue uniforms entered first class. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Officer Grant Hayes, 40, 7, broad, shouldered with a square jaw set as if ready to strike down anyone in his path, strode forward. Beside him was Officer Min Le, just 20, 6, young, his face still marked with inexperience, though his eyes brimmed with tension. Grant's gaze swept the cabin and stopped at Lena Hart, who immediately raised her hand and pointed toward seat 1A. "That one. He refused instructions and is obstructing procedure." Every eye turned toward Adrian Wells. He remained upright in his seat, laptop open before him, the words Protocol Sigma, armed glowing on the screen. "Sir," Grant said in a low, clipped voice, "we need you to step off this plane to resolve this." Adrian lifted his head slowly, his eyes locking forward. No fear, no wavering, only a calm that chilled the cabin to its core. "I have presented my valid ticket 3 times. I am in the seat I purchased. I have not caused a disturbance. So what is the real reason?" Min Le stood beside him, glancing quickly from Grant to Lena. It was clear he was uncertain, but Grant did not hesitate. "The reason is you did not follow a crew member's instruction." In that instant, Douglas Mara, the man in seat 1C, suddenly chimed in, his voice sharp with irritation. "For God's sake, just drag him out already. We actually have real work waiting in Los Angeles. Some people only know how to play the victim." The words landed like a hammer. Zoe Park's live stream shook as her audience erupted with comments. He just turned it into an open racial issue. The cops better not make a mistake. This is history. Live on our screens. Zoe whispered, her voice trembling but steady. We're at nearly 7,000 viewers. CNN just joined. Guys, this has become national news. Adrian angled his laptop slightly, so the screen's glow lit up Grant and Min's faces. The words, Sigma Protocol armed, awaiting confirmation, burned brightly. His voice was deep, measured, unshakable. This is a warning, not a threat. One click, and the entire system you rely on to operate this flight will go dark. Grant scowled, his hand drifting near his radio. Min swallowed hard, instinctively stepping half a pace back. In his eyes, Adrian was no longer a disruptive passenger, but a force he had never encountered. At the back of the cabin, Eleanor Price suddenly rose. Her voice carried, not loud but firm enough to demand attention. I am a retired federal judge. I have been watching from the beginning. This man has never shouted, never disrupted. He has only defended his right to sit in the seat he purchased. If you think this is about security, your greatest mistake is failing to see the truth. This is discrimination. Murmurs spread. Some passengers lowered their heads. Others nodded. Douglas fell silent. His face flushed red. Grant glanced at Eleanor, then back at Adrian, his voice lowering but still laced with threat. You are delaying the flight. If you refuse to leave, we will be forced to act. Adrian tilted his head, his hand calmly resting on the touchpad, his finger hovering above the enter key. No, you are delaying the flight, and if you take one more step, I will ensure not only this plane, but the entire Sky Continental fleet is grounded. Zoe's phone buzzed violently as comments poured like a flood. He's Adrian Wells. I just Googled it. CEO of Wells Cyber Defense. The man who secures the nation's transportation infrastructure. God, they're about to bring down one of the most powerful men in the industry. Zoe held her breath, focusing her camera close on Adrian's face. He did not flinch, did not raise a brow. Only his eyes, dark and fathomless, seemed to pierce through every pretense and every mask. Then the radio on Grant's shoulder crackled. Unit 6, report status. He lifted it, but before he could answer, the command center's voice rang clear. Stand down. Repeat, do not engage. Authorization from higher level. Do not touch passenger 1A. The cabin froze. Grant stiffened. Min's mouth fell open. Lena's eyes widened. Adrian simply exhaled and leaned back into his seat. He did not need to speak again. The truth spoke for itself. Eleanor sat down, her lips whispering. Just as I thought. He doesn't just hold seat 1A. He holds the sky. Zoe whispered into her live stream, her voice breaking with emotion. Guys, this isn't just an incident on a plane. This is the moment where power and justice collide. First class had become a battlefield without weapons. The clash was not of fists, but of prejudice against truth. And at its center, Adrian Wells, the man they tried to push into economy, had just overturned the entire game with nothing more than a laptop. First class remained taut as a drawn wire. The two security officers had not yet left when a sharp ping from Adrian Wells's laptop cut through the air, precise and chilling. The screen flickered green with the words, Protocol Sigma, armed, awaiting confirmation. A heartbeat skipped. Then the cabin erupted in whispers, stifled curses, and astonishment. Zoe Park, her hands trembling, whispered into her phone, What are we witnessing? If he presses enter, this entire airline could collapse. Adrian said nothing. His hand simply rested on the keyboard, his finger hovering above enter. Each passing second stretched into an eternity. Grant Hayes, 47, clenched his teeth. He was not a man easily shaken, but sweat had begun to bead along his temple. "You are threatening flight safety," he barked. Adrian raised his head, eyes like ice. "No. I am reminding you of the consequences of turning prejudice into policy. I warned you. You chose not to listen." Minle, the young officer, bit his lip. He glanced at Zoe's live stream, watching the viewer count spike. 9,000, 11,000, 14,000. The world was watching. He thought to himself, if I make a mistake, the entire country will know. Meanwhile, Douglas Mara in seat 1C sneered, masking his fear with arrogance. "This is just theater. A hacker in a suit. Can't you all see that?" Eleanor Price turned to him, her gaze sharp as a blade. "You might want to be careful with your words, because if this is theater, then I fear this play has the power to ground your entire airline." A message flashed across Adrian's tablet screen. From Tara Singh, his company's COO. "Crimson Protocol authorization granted. Do not take the bait. Hold your rhythm, Adrian." He read it, nodded faintly, no wasted expression. His eyes returned to the cabin. Adrian typed a series of commands. The screen shifted. No explosion, no smoke, but silence swept in, as though the air itself had been drained. A passenger in seat 3B whispered, "The Wi-Fi light. It just went off." And it had. The Wi-Fi symbol on the cabin screens blinked out. At the same moment, crew tablets froze, their screens turning white with the words, "No signal." Miles Turner flipped his device back and forth, his voice strangled. "Impossible. We synced just 5 minutes ago." In the back, passengers reached for their phones. The Sky Continental app froze. The website would not load. Service messages vanished. Zoe nearly screamed into her live stream. "Oh my God, their entire system is down. Do you see this?" He pressed a few keys, and the whole airline froze. Eleanor leaned back in her seat, a faint smile crossing her lips. "This isn't hacking. This is rightful control. He built the infrastructure. Of course he holds the keys." Grant Hayes gripped his radio, shouting, "Control, report. We've lost contact. The whole system is unresponsive." But the radio only hissed static. No reply. Minle's voice dropped, trembling. "Sir, what did you just do?" Adrian closed his laptop gently, his gaze calm. "I did nothing. I only reminded them where the real power lies." At that moment, Douglas Maran's phone clattered to the floor. He tapped frantically, but nothing worked. The screen displayed only, "Unable to connect." Douglas shouted, "Impossible! I have a $3 billion merger meeting in Los Angeles. You just destroyed, Adrian cut in, his tone cold as steel. No, you destroyed it yourselves. I only stripped away the mask. At the back of the cabin, a man in black glasses and suit at seat 4C quietly tapped his smartwatch, recording every word. Daniel Cortez, an undercover investigative journalist. And in that instant, he knew he had captured the scoop of his career. A CEO secretly grounding an airline right before tens of thousands of live viewers. Grant tried to reclaim authority, stepping forward. Wells, I demand you stop immediately. This act could be classified as cyber attack. Adrian slowly rose, standing face to face, towering half a head taller. His eyes did not blaze, but the force behind them made Grant instinctively step back. No, this is not an attack. This is a reminder. And you should be grateful I kept it at a warning. Zoe's voice cracked on her live stream, trembling. Guys, he didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just made an entire airline kneel. In the cabin, whispers rippled like an undertow. Wells' cyber defense, the man behind the system. He could ground the sky itself. And with a single touch of a key, Adrian Wells had turned an insult into a warning shot that reverberated across an entire industry. The shrill ring of a phone cut through first class, sharp and piercing like a blade slicing the silence. Every eye turned toward Adrian Wells. Slowly, he drew a sleek black phone from his jacket pocket and glanced at the glowing screen. The name read, Caleb Morton, CEO of Sky Continental. Zoe Park nearly dropped her live streaming phone. She gasped. Guys, the airline's CEO is calling him directly. He's really that powerful. More than 20,000 viewers were watching at once. The comments exploded. Unbelievable, he's calling him directly. One twist after another. This is history, live on stream. Adrian pressed answer, his voice low, almost a whisper. I suppose you had to call eventually. Caleb Morton's voice crackled from the speaker, heavy and urgent. Adrian, we need to talk. Right now. The cabin froze. Passengers realized they were listening to a conversation between the man who held the keys to the system and the man at the very top of the airline. You've crippled my entire system, Caleb panted, trying to sound calm, but with defeat seeping through. We have hundreds of flights delayed, tens of thousands of passengers stranded. Adrian, you've made your point. Stop now before the damage is irreversible. Adrian's reply landed like hammer blows in the air. No, Caleb, I haven't made my point. I've only reminded you that real power doesn't come from a uniform or a name badge. It comes from fairness. And today, fairness was buried under your staff's prejudice. In seat 1C, Douglas Marin's face went pale as he muttered, This is beyond control. Eleanor Price sat upright, her eyes blazing like headlights, her lips mouthing, Justice, finally someone strong enough to summon it. Zoe tightened her focus on Adrian's phone screen, holding her breath so she wouldn't miss a single word. Caleb lowered his voice, pleading. Fine. I'll handle it. I'll discipline the staff. But please, don't turn this into a public spectacle. We can resolve this internally. You know, shareholders, the press, the government, they'll all descend on this. Adrian gave a cold laugh, a smile without joy. Public is the only way real change happens. What happened on this flight isn't just an internal issue. It's a societal one. And when it unfolds before hundreds of witnesses and tens of thousands watching live, do you think I could let it sink quietly into silence? Caleb faltered. Then another voice cut into the call, deep and grave. This is Nathan Hart. I'm in the board meeting. Adrian, I've been watching the entire live stream. I saw everything. Lena Hart flinched, her face draining of color. She looked up, lips trembling. Father, Nathan's voice carried weight. Lena is my daughter, but what I just witnessed is unforgivable. I raised her to live right, not to become a tool of prejudice. She will be suspended, publicly. I will not let my daughter become a stain on this airline's history. Lena sat frozen, tears welling as her nails dug into the seat's edge until they bled. Adrian leaned back slightly, his voice calm but cutting. This is not only about Lena. It's about your entire system. A network too accustomed to hiding and excusing. And I will not let it continue. Caleb exhaled, the sound of desperation clear. Then what do you want? Tell me. I'll listen. Adrian rose to his feet, turning to face the cabin. He wasn't speaking only to Caleb or Nathan, but to everyone. Passengers, crew, and the tens of thousands watching beyond. I want 3 things, and none of them are negotiable. 1, suspend Lena Hart publicly and launch an independent investigation. 2, every frontline employee must undergo real anti-bias training, not hollow slides. 3, establish a transparent reporting system overseen by a third party, so every discrimination complaint is recorded and addressed. Caleb was silent for a long time. His heavy breathing filled the speaker. Then his hoarse voice returned. Fine, you'll have all 3, but let me handle it quietly. We can issue a joint statement. Careful wording. Adrian cut him off, sharp and final. No, I don't craft statements. I craft truth, and the truth will be spoken here, in front of every witness. He pressed end. The cabin erupted in gasps, murmurs, and the sound of tentative clapping that swelled until it filled the air. Zoe's voice cracked on the live stream, emotional. You saw it. He didn't negotiate. He forced the airline's CEO to bow. This isn't just a moment. This is change. Adrian stood tall in first class, his presence towering, his eyes sweeping over those who had doubted, mocked, or stayed silent. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to pound a table. His presence alone was enough to russet the balance of power. Eleanor Price nodded, her lips curving in quiet satisfaction. Yes, she whispered, at last. Someone who claimed not just a seat, but justice itself. The cabin was silent. But it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of acknowledgement. An acknowledgement no one could ever take back. The beep of the ended call still echoed through the cabin. Every eye was fixed on Adrian Wells. He drew in a slow breath and stood tall, as if the entire first-class cabin had transformed into a courtroom, and he was the man who had just taken hold of the judge's gavel. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice was steady, not loud, not rushed, but heavy with weight. I just spoke directly with the CEO of this airline, and I have given 3 demands, 3 conditions that are not negotiable. Passengers held their breath. Zoe Park steadied her camera, whispering to her live stream with a trembling voice. "This is it. He's about to announce." Adrian lifted his head high, his gaze sweeping across every face. "First," he said, each word striking into the silence, "the flight attendant who blocked me, who turned prejudice into policy, will be suspended immediately, publicly and transparently, not reassigned, not given quiet leave." Lena Hart sat rigid near the galley, her face pale. Her lips quivered as if to object, but no sound escaped. The cabin stirred in shock. A few claps broke out softly. "Second," Adrian continued, his voice firmer, "every frontline employee, from flight attendants and gate staff to customer service, will undergo real anti-bias training. Not PowerPoint slides, not 15 times minute videos, but serious training from leading research organizations, so that never again will a passenger be judged by their appearance." A clap thundered from the back, then another. The applause spread, hesitant but steady, one beat at a time. "And third," Adrian paused, his gaze sharpening like steel, "this airline will establish a transparent reporting system, overseen by an independent third party. Every complaint of discrimination from passengers or staff will be logged, tracked, and addressed. No more buried files, no more erased evidence, no more silenced victims." First class shook with the sound of collective applause. Some passengers leapt to their feet. Eleanor Price beamed, her hands trembling but clapping strongly. Douglas Maron in 1C gaped, his eyes darting between Adrian and the applauding crowd. He forced a weak laugh, but it was drowned in the roar of clapping. Zoe choked back tears on her live stream. "Do you see this? He didn't demand compensation. He didn't demand privilege. He demanded change for everyone." Comments flooded in. "This man didn't just save himself. He's saving the system. Justice in first. Remember that hashtag." Miles Turner, the purser, stared down at the floor. Daniel Cortez, the journalist in 4C, scribbled furiously, his eyes blazing. He knew his story would begin with the line, "The moment a passenger turned a cabin into a courtroom, and an airline was forced to hear its verdict." Adrian closed his laptop, but did not put it away. He left it glowing on the table, a beacon reminding them all that Sigma could be activated at any moment. Then he looked directly at Lena, his voice not loud but carrying through the cabin. "You asked me to leave this seat because you thought I didn't belong in it. The truth is, you were the one unfit for your responsibility." Lena opened her mouth, tears welling, but no defense came. Her whole body trembled. Adrian turned to Miles, his eyes cutting deep. "And you. You had a chance to correct this, but you chose to side with wrong for your own comfort. That is how prejudice survives, not through those who act, but through those who look away." Miles bowed his head, his hands clenched white. Zoe's voice cracked as she addressed her live stream. 30,000 people are watching live. Everyone is calling him the man who grounded the skies for justice. Eleanor leaned toward Zoe, whispering, "Remember this moment, child. One day you'll tell the next generation that you were on flight 2227. Adrian drew a breath, his voice now warmer but still sharp. "I don't need a press conference. I don't need a boardroom. I need witnesses, and every one of you here today is a witness. When a system uses power to exclude instead of protect, it must change. And that change begins this very moment." The cabin erupted. Applause, shouts, even tears filled the air. Douglas bowed his head, his hands trembling. Lena sat hollow, eyed, tears streaking her face. Miles exhaled, head hanging low. Zoe ended her live stream, her voice hoarse with emotion. He didn't just keep his seat, he changed the sky itself. The applause slowly faded, leaving behind a dense silence, but that silence did not last. Ping! A new notification flashed on Adrian Wells's laptop. The sender was anonymous, the only detail a simple address. crewchange2024@gmail.com. He opened it. The cabin held its breath. On the screen appeared dozens of attachments, internal reports, chat transcripts, personnel notes, even audio recordings. Line after line emerged, raw and chilling. Rebecca Hart routinely discriminated against black passengers. Report filed 2022. HR response: perception is subjective. Miles Turner joked, fake platinum is easy to spot by the hairstyle. Everyone knew what he meant. If this ever reached Carter, maybe someone would finally listen. Adrian read each line slowly, his words striking the cabin like hammer blows. Zoe Park stopped breathing, pushing her camera close to the screen. The live stream erupted. "Oh my God, this is evidence!" They knew about this since 2022 and stayed silent? The system is rotten to the core. Viewer count soared. 40,000, 50, 2,000, 70,000. Eleanor Price tapped her cane against the floor, her voice ringing clear. "Do you see now? This is no longer about one flight attendant. This is a systemic disease, and it has been covered up for far too long." Douglas Marin bit his lip, sweat trickling down his temple. He fumbled for his phone to send a message, but the Sky Continental app was still frozen, brazenly flashing. No connection. Adrian lifted his gaze, sweeping across the cabin. They thought these files would stay buried in a drawer, but today they will no longer be hidden. He turned the screen so all could see. Bold letters glared from a document. Discrimination Complaint Records. Sky Continental Airlines. A wave of whispers rippled through first class. A mother clutched her child tighter. A businessman bowed his head, ashamed by his own silence. At seat 4C, Daniel Cortez, the investigative journalist, pressed record on his smartwatch and typed furiously on his tablet. He whispered, "An entire systemic cover. Up! This isn't just news. This is a nuclear bomb." He could already see the headline. Flight 227, when one first-class seat exposed a network of discrimination. Miles Turner, pale as chalk, leapt up. That's leaked material. You can't." Adrian cut him off, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Can't? I built this system. I know exactly what it hides. And now the world will know too." Zoe's voice cracked on the live stream. 90,000 viewers. CNN, BBC, Reuters all just joined the stream. He's turned first class into a global press conference. Comments flooded in. #HapJustice. In first is trending #1. This is the Rosa Parks moment of the 21st century. A 17-year-old just recorded history with a phone. Adrian inhaled deeply, staring straight into Zoe's camera, as if speaking directly to the world. This is not a personal incident. This is the result of a system that permits prejudice to exist and protects itself. But I promise, today will be the last day it is allowed to remain hidden. A clap rang out, then another, and soon the entire cabin erupted. Not polite applause, but the furious clapping of people who had just seen the truth laid bare. Eleanor Price's eyes glistened as she turned to Adrian. You didn't just keep your seat. You pulled an entire system into the light. That is the real victory. Adrian gave a slight nod, his voice lowering. Victory is only the beginning. Change is the true goal. At Sky Continental headquarters, phones rang shrill, screens flashing red alerts. Caleb Morton, the airline's CEO, slammed his hand on the table. God, he just opened the internal files. The stock will plummet. The entire industry will erupt. A trembling PR advisor stammered. You must respond immediately, but hundreds of thousands have already watched the live stream. We can't control the narrative anymore. Caleb buried his face in his hands. He knew the control had slipped from him. On the plane, Adrian Wells closed his laptop and looked around the cabin. I don't need apologies anymore. I need change. And now, no one can pretend they don't know. First class burned with applause, with eyes wide open, with tears. To the tens of thousands watching live, this was no longer a commercial flight. It was a public trial of a system, and justice had just taken flight. First class still trembled with the echoes of applause. But everything fell silent when Adrian Wells rose to his feet. He did not move quickly or loudly. He walked with deliberate steps, each one like a punctuation mark carved into history. He turned to face the cabin, his voice low yet resonant enough for every row to hear. It is time you knew who I am. He paused, letting silence set the stage. Dozens of eyes widened, hearts pounding in anticipation. Zoe Park clutched her phone tightly, her live stream now topping 120,000 viewers. I am Adrian Wells, he said, his tone calm but carrying. CEO and founder of Wells Cyber Defense. My company is the one contracted to build, maintain, and secure the entire operational infrastructure of Sky Continental Airlines and 14 other carriers around the world. A collective gasp filled the air like a cold wind rushing through the cabin. Douglas Marin in seat 1C sank back as if struck. Eleanor Price smiled, her eyes alight like fire. Adrian went on, his gaze cutting deep. We are responsible for ensuring flights are scheduled, crews are assigned, gates are confirmed, and passengers processed at every digital touchpoint. In other words, we hold the keys to the entire He stopped, his voice slower now but sharp as a blade. And today, I locked those keys. Zoe nearly screamed into her live stream. He just confirmed it. He's the one who holds the skies. A businessman in seat 2C dropped his phone to the floor, eyes wide with shock. A mother in seat 3B clutched her child closer, whispering, Look, That's the man who changed everything. Adrian drew in a deep breath. I did not do this for myself. I did this because this system has turned power into a weapon of exclusion. When I was blocked from sitting in the seat I paid for, it was not just a personal insult. It was a declaration that some people are never considered worthy. That must end. Near the galley, Lena Hart stumbled to her feet, tears streaking her cheeks. I didn't know. Adrian fixed his eyes on her, his voice heavy and unyielding. Yes, you didn't know. That is the problem. You did not know that every glance, every word, every small decision reinforces prejudice. You did not know that ignorance can be cruel, and that ignorance has made you wrong. Lena broke down, sobbing into her hands, unable to speak. Adrian turned to Miles Turner. And you? You did not start this, but you chose silence, and silence enables injustice. The bystanders are sometimes more dangerous than those who act. Miles bowed his head, his hands trembling. He did not argue. He could not. At seat 4C, journalist Daniel Cortez rose. He held up his tablet, documents glowing on the screen, his voice ringing through the cabin. I have checked. The internal files confirm Miles Turner was accused of blocking the promotion of a black female pilot. The case was dismissed by his former classmate in HR. This is no longer an incident. This is a system shielding its own failures. The cabin erupted. Gasps, furious whispers, even curses spilled out. Eleanor Price exhaled sharply, her eyes blazing with both outrage and hope. At last the light has reached them. Adrian raised his voice, clear and firm. I do not want apologies. I want change. And I have forced your CEO to agree to 3 conditions: public suspension, serious training, and a transparent reporting system. This is not about one flight. This is about the future. Applause roared. Some passengers stood and chanted, "Justice! Justice!" Zoe wept openly, speaking into her live stream. This is no longer just a flight. This is a movement. #Justice in First is spreading across the world. In the galley, Lena collapsed into her seat, burying her head in her hands. Miles sat frozen in silence. Douglas Maron trembled, fumbling uselessly with his dead phone. Meanwhile, passengers all around stood, many stepping toward Adrian, shaking his hand, thanking him. Voices rang out. You've changed everything. We stand with you. Adrian closed his laptop, placed it back on the table, and delivered his final words. Today, all I wanted was to sit in the seat I had paid for. But you forced me to prove that sometimes sitting down is the only way to stand up. The cabin exploded into thunderous applause. No hesitation, no fear. It was applause for justice, for change, and for a truth that had finally been revealed. Flight 227 still sat motionless on the runway, but its aftershocks had already soared far beyond the skies. In just 1 hour, the stock markets shook. Sky Continental shares plunged like a stone falling into a canyon. Airlines across the industry rushed into emergency meetings, their boardrooms buzzing like shattered hives. At Sky Continental headquarters in Manhattan, CEO Caleb Morton stood frozen before a wall of crimson warning screens. A panicked aide shouted, "Sir, all domestic flights are grounded. The backup systems are unresponsive." "We've lost control." Caleb gripped his phone, but did not dare call Adrian Wells back. He understood that power had shifted from his gleaming office to the first-class cabin of a Boeing. Inside the cabin, passengers clustered around Adrian like satellites orbiting their center. Eleanor Price sat tall, her eyes shimmering. "You didn't just defend your seat, Adrian. You forced an entire industry to confront itself." Zoe Park, eyes red, live-streamed to hundreds of thousands. "Everyone, we are witnessing history. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to strike. All he needed was truth. And this truth just brought an entire industry to its knees." In a rival airline's boardroom, an HR executive whispered, "The Carter Protocol. No, it's now the Wells Protocol. If we don't implement it immediately, our shareholders will destroy us." Another carrier fired off an urgent internal email. "All frontline staff must undergo anti-bias training within 7 days." A third declared, "Every pending discrimination complaint must be reviewed immediately." The dominoes toppled, all beginning from seat 1A. On the plane, Douglas Mara, the man who once demanded "throw him out," now sat hollow-eyed. He fumbled with his phone, but his finance app glitched. His emails refused to send. In that silence, he understood. The moment he chose to remain complicit had become a verdict hanging over his own reputation. Suddenly, investigative journalist Daniel Cortez stood, raising his tablet. "Breaking news. I have confirmed with 2 independent sources. Wells Cyber Defense has officially terminated all operational contracts with Sky Continental. The airline lost control of its systems the moment Mr. Wells pressed a key in seat 1A. Gasps filled the cabin. Adrian sat calmly, his gaze unwavering. Eleanor Price tapped her cane against the floor, her voice resolute. "This is no longer Flight 227. This is Trial 227. And also today, justice has prevailed." Applause thundered. It swept through the cabin like a tidal wave, from 1A to the very back, then rolled forward again, striking the faces of those who had once looked away. In Washington, a group of lawmakers convened an emergency session. One said, "We can no longer ignore this. Invite Adrian Wells to testify. His demands must become law." A congressional aide typed swiftly, tagging the document. "Anti-Bias in Transportation Act, Wells Protocol." Back in the cabin, Zoe's screen lit up with a notification. "You have reached 1 million followers." Hashtag Justice in First has surpassed 50 million mentions. She broke into tears, turning her camera toward Adrian. "Mr. Wells, the whole world is listening to you." Adrian looked around, his eyes softening. He saw faces, confused, regretful, moved, hopeful. He saw a young boy clutching his father's arm, whispering, "Dad? Is he a superhero?" The father smiled and replied quietly, "No, son. He is real, and real is what injustice fears most." Adrian stood one final time, his voice ringing like words etched into steel. "Today I was not seeking victory for myself. I was seeking a new system, one where no one is deemed unworthy simply because they look different." Seat 1A is mine. But justice belongs to all of us. The applause roared back, louder than any engine. In that moment, Flight 227 was no longer a delayed plane. It was a symbol, a beginning. At Wells Cyber Defense Headquarters, Tara Singh received Adrian's message. Activate Phase 2. Build the industry. Wide reporting system. She smiled, typing back. Roger that. The skies will never be the same. And when Flight 227 finally lifted off the runway, its engines roaring, the passengers were not just aboard a flight. They were aboard history. Zoe ended her live stream, tears still streaking her face, whispering, "He didn't just hold a seat. He held the skies." There are flights that only carry people from point A to point B. But Flight 227 carried the entire world to a different destination. Justice. From a first-class ticket that was questioned, Adrian Wells turned it into the spark for a movement that would transform an entire industry. But the question now is no longer whether he kept Seat 1A. The real question is this: if one day you were judged not by your abilities or your effort, but by your appearance, would you stay silent and accept it? Or would you rise and change the system? If you believe that justice is not a privilege, but a basic right for all of us, hit like on this video. Don't forget to share so others can see it, and subscribe so you won't miss the stories to come, where the smallest moments can grow into storms powerful enough to change the world. And leave your comment below. What would you do if you were passenger 1A? We want to hear your story.